Adam Steer on ABC Radio Darwin and the ABC Listen app.
It was a lovely morning and we had some traditional ceremonies and dances and song, which was beautiful. The administrator gave his address outlining our government's plan for the territory and what we commit to deliver on. And then we had all the new members speaking as well. Of course, importantly, we outlined our transparency provisions for the parliament. So an independent speaker in the member for Araluen. Of course, we've doubled the time for debate of petitions from what Labor had it. And we've brought in place establishing a legislative scrutiny committee. So it was a very big day, but we're raring to go on the business now. Today will be Declan's Law, and we're very proud to have Samara Laverty, Declan Laverty's mother, in the chamber with us today.
So yesterday your government announced this establishment of the legislative scrutiny committee, but you're pushing through a bunch of very serious and changed laws without the scrutiny committee looking at them.
That's right.
That sounds like smoke and mirrors.
No. So currently under the previous government, there was no legislative scrutiny committee. So the CLP is bringing one in. But what we're doing over this next 2 weeks is passing our reducing crime package on urgency, which means it won't go through that normal lengthy parliamentary process. It will be done urgently as a crisis response to a crisis situation off the back of well-ventilated years and years of the CLP talking about its plan to reduce crime. And so we took those commitments to the election, had spent years ventilating them with the community and in the parliament. And so that is why we have the confidence of the people to pursue them this fortnight.
But that doesn't change the fact that if the scrutiny committee is there to make sure that the laws and legislation are correct, these big reforms you're putting in aren't going to be put through the scrutiny committee to which you are designing it to do that.
So a scrutiny committee's role really is about making sure that the consultation is there. And that's why we're confident about our reducing crime package, because we have just had an election. These pieces of reform around minimum mandatory sentencing for assaults on workers, stronger bail laws, making breach of bail condition an offence, stronger powers for police to deal with alcohol. They're all issues and laws we've brought to the parliament before over a number of years. And so the consultation piece has been done. Territorians have voted. And I said very clearly yesterday that special interest groups and political commentators, they have a right to be part of the political process. But the people who we are listening to and delivering for are the everyday Territorians who have given my CLP government a very clear job to do, and we are getting on with that job.
You say you're listening to the people when it comes to the reforms, but many of those who are criticising these laws are Territorians. They work in law, they work in prisons, they work in schools, they work in healthcare. They're concerned about the impact these reforms could have on community safety. Don't those voices matter?
Those voices do matter, and they've had their chance to have their say, and ultimately they were unsuccessful in their pursuit. The people who were successful were people who voted for stronger action and reform in this space, and so that's what we're delivering as we committed to. And I have to say, Adam, Territorians have an expectation when they elect a government that government will deliver on its commitments. Now, my government is saying very clearly and has taken strong action to say we will deliver what we promised. And so not only is there an expectation in the community for us to do that, I have an obligation as the Chief Minister to deliver what we said we would do. And I have no intention of breaching that trust with the people. Our job is very, very clear. We will get on with that job. The Parliament will have robust debate over the next 2 weeks. Every single member of Parliament can speak and ask questions. It's still an incredibly robust process that we welcome, because a good government needs a good opposition. But at the end of the day, these laws will be put to a vote, and we intend to pursue this agenda as we promised we would.
Let's get to one of the key issues we've had in the last 24 hours, and it's the sad issue. It looks like 7 women have been killed since June in the Northern Territory, allegedly from domestic violence incidents. There are 2 more in a critical condition. Your government is focused on getting tough on crime, but the biggest form of crime in the Territory is domestic violence. Why isn't that the forefront of your government's agenda?
So I think there's a misconception here. Our bail reform, for example, will make a huge impact on driving down the rates of all crime, which includes domestic and family violence. So what we know is that by giving police, even our alcohol laws, this is a good example. So by giving police greater powers to deal with alcohol, one of the practical outcomes of our legislation is that police can when they see someone drinking in public, they can then do a search on whether there's outstanding warrants, domestic and family violence orders, and that then allows police to act much earlier before that violence continues on later in the day. And so we're very, very focused on the family and domestic violence numbers. It's actually part of this suite of measures. We don't necessarily talk about it separately because our laws apply so broadly to a range of laws. But make no mistake, the numbers are absolutely tragic. It's again, we're in the headlines nationally for all the wrong reasons, but that's why we're so focused on better powers for police, sorting out our issues with corrections, intervening early, protecting victims. That's our core focus.
A lot, though, of those alleged incidents and those alleged perpetrators at the moment, they're not on breach of bail, they're not on parole. So how are these laws going to help those victims?
Well, we're also changing the laws for bail so that repeat serious violent offenders aren't getting bail as often as they are at the moment. So, for example...
But they weren't on bail, that's what I'm saying, these people.
Well, but people who, I don't know that they weren't on bail, Adam, but what we're saying is this is about intervening earlier. So when it comes to alcohol, making sure that if people are not meant to be drinking or they have DVOs, that we're separating those people and getting in early. It's about dealing with people who are on bail and whether or not they're offending during that period of time. It's about strengthening the laws to protect innocent people. So make no mistake, the piece of reform, this reducing crime package, is not the end of it. It's the start. And it's going to have a big impact, but it's not the total impact. So much more work to be done. I don't want people thinking the next 2 weeks is the be-all and end-all and, I go off and have a holiday for 4 years. It's just the start of what is a much bigger package.
7 women.
That's right. It's tragic.
It may even be more than that, but minimum 7 women allegedly lost their lives to domestic violence incidents since June.
That's right.
Shelters around the Northern Territory have been warning for months that they're reaching crisis point and are turning away many women each night. You've got $180 million. You've earmarked that for the domestic sector. How much of that is going into creating more shelters?
I don't have that breakdown, Adam, but I think from memory, and I'm just stretching my memory here, it's about $32 million this year is going into that domestic violence prevention space. But I agree with you, and I've spoken to many women who've approached me who are actually in that crisis phase at the moment where they may have had to flee home, they're sleeping in their cars, they're trying to manage the kids and work out what's next for them given all of those really complicated circumstances that surround them. So it's definitely a tragic issue. We're looking at the options there. And at the end of the day, there also needs to be community and individual responsibility about the levels of violence we're seeing across the territory. But no doubt there is an intrinsic link between high levels of domestic and family violence and kids going off the rails. And so this is...
accommodation. They are linked to accommodation.
Yeah. And so, these are things that we need to do. And that's part of why we need to deal with the root causes of crime, because we need kids living in safe environments, families being safe and supported to live productive and healthy lives. And so, that's the work we've got to do over the next 4 years.
Teresa has said, good morning. I have a question for the leader. The CLP is going to lock up 10-year-olds. How does the public know that these children will get the rehabilitation program needed to change behaviour? How do we know they are not returned to the environment that helped them create that behaviour? And how do you hold those services accountable?
So, great question, because currently right now, 100% those kids are being returned to that bad environment because there are no other options. And this is our entire point. By Labor raising the age, what they've done is disempower authorities to be able to do anything for these kids. So if a 10-year-old commits a crime today, they will absolutely be dropped home to the place that probably created their unlawful behaviour in the first place. What we're saying is we need to intervene earlier and put in place those wraparound services, whether it's children and families needing to go in. And maybe it is a police response. It depends on the severity of the offending, obviously. But we're not seeing, this misinterpretation that these kids are stealing a loaf of bread because they're hungry is just wrong. That is not the offending we're seeing. We're seeing high levels of offending. For example, last weekend, those young people who stole the car and rammed the police cars. Dozens of offences behind them. Again, they're probably the product of a bad home environment, but that doesn't make it okay to go and perpetrate violence on other people.
This week you made the surprise announcement that all of your backbenchers, 8 of them, all new to Parliament, would be elevated to the role of assistant ministers. Will these assistant ministers get extra pay, extra responsibilities? Will they visit Canberra and other capital cities under those titles?
It's a great job. They get no extra pay and lots of extra work, Adam. So it's good. Assistant ministries are a really powerful opportunity for backbenchers to work in areas of interest to them. So I've been meeting with the team, finding out what lights that fire in their belly, what they're interested in learning more about. It gives them a chance to delve into issues, support the minister, attend events, be across issues. So it's a great way to learn, and it also provides a wonderful support to the minister.
In 2021, you put out a media release condemning the Gunner government for having assistant ministers, and I quote, "Was Mr Monaghan made an assistant minister purely so he could get increased travel entitlements?" Your assistant ministers, if they are allowed to travel more, will those costs be taken out from the electoral allowance of the MLAs or from the government coffers because they are now assistant ministers?
I can't really see any time where they would need to travel, Adam, to be honest. It's really about learning the ropes. It's about understudying. It's about getting into issues or being a conduit to the community, for example. So a great example, when I was a backbencher, many, many moons ago, Adam, I was, we called it parliamentary secretary at the time, but it was the same thing. And I got to be involved in the 40th anniversary of Cyclone Tracy commemoration. So I would go along to community meetings. I would try and be that conduit between what people were expecting out of the government for those commemorations and the government. So it really is about, it really is what they make of it. At the end of the day, those assistant ministers will get as involved as they want to, and I'm giving them the opportunity to learn some new skills and new areas of expertise.
You've made Robin Lamley the most experienced member of Parliament outside of your party, the Speaker. It's a smart political decision, isn't it? Former CLP Minister for Alcohol, former Treasurer of the Northern Territory. She would prove a formidable opponent if she felt your government was losing its way. Were you trying to minimise any potential future criticism?
No, a good government needs a strong opposition, and I expressed that to Selina Yubo yesterday. And I'm really proud when nominating Robin Lamley, I spoke to the opposition leader. She welcomed the nomination, seconded the nomination in the Parliament, and we both, as tradition dictates, dragged, in inverted commas, Robin Lamley to the Speaker's chair, which is a long-held tradition. And it's a very important decision for the Parliament. Robin Lamley is the most experienced member of Parliament out of all 25 of us. And so running a parliament is very important. We know we've got to build back some convention and tradition and decorum in our parliament, and I think Robin Lamley will handle that extremely well. Let's
move to middle schools. What's the position of your government on middle schools? Will they get abolished? I think in 4 or 5 years' time. I think that was the old plan. Is that still going to happen?
No, that is still going to happen, but there's a lot of consultation and water that has to go under this bridge, as people can understand. So I'm aware that letters have gone out because we want that consultation with families, students, teachers, principals, the entire schooling framework about what this is going to look like. It's been 20 years, so to unscramble this egg is going to be a very big piece of work, but we're not going to rush to it. Next year's school will be absolutely the same for kids as it is now, so students and teachers and families have confidence next year's proceeding as it always has, or as it has for the last 20 years, and we'll work through that consultation.
Because the challenge is the previous Chief Minister, Eva Lawler, said no schools would close. The question is, how many high schools does Darwin and Palmerston need? Sanderson, CSC, Nightcliff, Dripstone, they're all in within a couple of kilometres of each other.
Yeah, exactly. And this is what I'm saying. It's a giant mess. I mean, it should never have happened 20 years ago. Everyone thought it would be a failed experiment then, and 20 years later we're paying the price. But we can't just keep going because it's too hard. We have to work through it, and it won't be easy, but we will do it in consultation with the community. And we already have established some working groups within the Department of Education, particularly for principals, around what this could look like. But we will have all this infrastructure, as you just said, Adam, and then how do we best use that to get the best outcomes for our kids?
Finally, do you support calls to break up the CLC and create land councils along language lines? Jacinta Price has called for a land council when she stood up in Alice Springs yesterday.
This is something that Jacinta Price has been incredibly vocal about for a long time. And what we need is agility in processes and for people to feel really represented on the ground. So I think if the coalition win the next election, they certainly have flagged that they're going to be looking at reforming this space, and all power to them. What we want to do is have a strong relationship with all of our land councils, and particularly around economic development in the bush. It's so very, very important. And there's increasing numbers of Aboriginal people wanting to get those Section 19 leases so they can run a business and have some certainty about the future. And that's our focus with land councils right now is economic development on Aboriginal land.
Adam Steer on ABC Radio Darwin and the ABC Listen app.